Thank you. Well, I really enjoyed listening to Eric. And is this too loud? It feels loud to me. Is it working okay? Good. So I have just a couple of comments there. I like rules of 3 in my life because complicated rules I just can't remember and I can't follow. So with my customers, there's 3 important aspects of my customers that make them desirable to me. One is I approve of their life and what they do, what they've chosen to do with their vocation. That makes it important for me. Thank you so much. If they pay promptly, that's a real plus too. And then the last thing, are they a joy to interact with? Now, if you want to be my customer, get at least 2 of those right. And then I'll consider you.
What was the first one again, please?
Do I agree and approve of what they've chosen to do with their life? Are they farming a small farm? Are they employing people from the prison ministries when they get out? That kind of thing. Even if it's not to their best advantage, maybe, that's a big deal for me. Because I want to help people become successful at what I believe will make our community successful. So that way I feel like I'm leveraging my skills as a mechanic. I'm not helping some godless atheist further his work. I'm helping a Christian do not just Christian things, but really good Christian things. And of course, it's my opinion there sometimes. So in spiritual life, sometimes I think of our maybe success in our spiritual life as a 3-legged stool. One leg of that stool, making us successful, is our parents and our family. We have parents and family that are supportive and helpful. That's a really important part of keeping us off the ground. Our church and our community is another leg of that stool. And then it's the Spirit of God in us and our personality. That's like the other leg. And you can kind of survive if you've got 2 of those legs, but 3 missing, you're just much more likely to shipwreck. And one more rule of thumb here, it's free. This is no cost to you. I can gain weight really well, and I'm concerned about that because as I get older, I get weaker, and I don't want to be feeble and disabled in my old age. So I can't do the whole 60% protein, 10% fat. That's just too complicated for me. So my rule is I love to bite things. So I try to drink no calories because that's too easy. I'm not biting, and it's just like, I'd rather get my calories by biting stuff. So that's pretty simple, And then this came up with listening to Eric. One of my rules of thumb about entertainment is never watch other people do enjoyable, fun things if I can do them myself. So that would mean play softball with my friends in a pickup game rather than watch a professional baseball game. It's just, this is how I want to live my life. What would be another example of that? Play pickup basketball rather than watch, a team do these things. And I'm not totally against watching other people. It's just I want to be part of my life and not sub out those things to other people. And one of the game theories that I have is when we have pickup basketball games and we're playing basketball, it's practice for really serious life. So there's about 10 chances in each little game we have to get a little bit upset with your opposing team. It's like, that was a foul. No, it wasn't. And you get it, and you're all worked up and warm, and you're really focused, and you're hot about it for a second. And it gives you a chance to feel that rush of strong feeling, and to then recognize in a moment of reflection, that's not me, that's not what I want to be. And then you get another chance, and you get it right this time, and you're like, look like, you don't get all worked up about it. In a place where you don't have a lot at stake. And then you practiced and practiced that, and you and your friends who are playing basketball are in church, and you're working out this thing where you really disagree with each other, and you have a chance to have constructive disagreement and to work that out and not let it sort of mushroom into a personality conflict that ends up splitting the church or something like that. So that's game theory for me, and that's why I think there are places and times when it's very important to play games. It gets us ready to do the really important things and do them well enough. There, that's my pre-sermon talk there. Edward Abbey wrote a number of books. One was Desert Solitaire. And he had a quote there that I got and I really liked. And the quote is, "Where there is no joy, there can be no courage. And without courage, all other virtues are useless." That seems a little weird, my first thought. But I have come to believe that it matters quite a lot. And I think maybe there's an idea in the New Testament that helps illustrate that. And it's, I just got part of the verse. "Who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is now set down at the right hand of God." And it speaks to delayed gratification, to working at denying ourselves in order for a goal that is greater than our immediate urges right here. So that's joy versus maybe having fun. And maybe you could make a distinction there. We are interested in keeping joy in our lives. And we do that by telling stories. So, first story I've got, after a drink of water. People ask me, they kind of know that I've done some academic things and traveled and worked abroad and stuff, and then here I am working in a shop. It's full of like greasy tractors with manure on them, and I look like a pig sometimes by the end of the day because I'm deep into it, and it's not very clean. It's just the way it is. And they're like, "LeRoy, where did you learn to be a mechanic? Did you go to school?" Well, I went to school, but I never took a mechanics class. And so when that first started coming up, I was like, boy, I cannot remember where I got started doing mechanics. So I asked my mom, when did I first do mechanics? And she thought a little bit, and then she told me this story. She said, when I was 8 months old, I was the first child in our family, and it was August, and she was canning tomatoes on a wood cook stove. And I was hot and grumpy, and I was on the floor, and I was pulling at her dress and whining. I mean, your children are probably much better than I was, but that's what I was doing. And she got in her head that this was dangerous and that I might get scalded with hot tomato juice. So she just quickly took all my clothes off, and she filled a little tub with water, put it on the front porch, and put me in. And it was, splash, carry on. And she was like, good, he's good for a while. And went right back in and worked on the tomatoes. And after a while came out to check on me. And wouldn't you know, I had escaped. I hadn't been 8 months, I couldn't walk yet. But I climbed out of that tub of water, across the porch, and I backed down the porch steps, crawled out to the yard gate, and I worked on it until I got it open. And I crawled out the little lane, it wasn't very long, and on the road, and over here, across the gravel road, she found me in my dad's little workshop. And he was fixing Maytag washing machine engines, because that was allowed in the Buchanan County Church. You know, you couldn't have motors on everything, but on washing machines you could. And I was in there with him, and I was playing with some greasy parts of motors and having a great time, and just got covered with grease and oil, and I was buck naked. And she was, oh good, you know, I didn't get lost, didn't fall in the creek. And eventually she cleaned me up and put some clothes on me, and would have forgotten about that. Except, apparently, while I was making my way across the road, a buggy came by, clop, 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 clop. And we can only imagine that the lady was like, look at that, that's William and Elizabeth LeRoy out on the road naked. And the husband's like, well, sure enough. Now, they did not stop to help me. They went right on by. And again, all I know is there were lots of children, lots of babies at that time. And it wasn't a big deal, you know, if one was out on the road, because there were more back. But they did remember when they saw Deacon Ed Gingrich later that week to mention it to him. And some of you are so far removed from that world that I'm going to have to explain the role of an Amish deacon. Now, there were three things that an Amish deacon was expected to do well when he was ordained through the lot. That was very important, because God gets to choose, to make the final choice. And in Buchanan County, God seemed to have a sense of kind of irony, because there were many Gingriches that became deacons. And the Gingriches had a reputation for being mischievous and pushing the edges a little more. And it was just right, God thought, to make them enforce the rules that they had been, you know, kind of working to push out a little bit. So these were the things that were expected. One, an Amish deacon would be expected to read the assigned scripture each Sunday. So if you didn't know how, you would learn to read German, and you were considered more successful if you were clear and loud and no mics. So you had to really develop your pipes. The second thing that an Amish deacon did is he was in charge of alms. And that meant if there was somebody in the church who was a widow maybe, or just simply had bad management or bad luck and needed help, he would discreetly go visit and make sure that there was enough food and that the bills could be paid and whether the church should be healthy. So that was an important thing. And of course the third thing was he was the messenger boy with bad news. So the whole team of ministers would be very tuned in to what made you Amish and what was not Amish. And there were many things that everybody agreed on just fine. You know, horses and buggies, of course, and you're not driving cars. You know, everybody knows that. But there's the little details. You know, the devil is in the details. And a couple of examples. In where I was born, there was a little more concern about diemut, or what we would say is humility. And so there were rules. And one of them was you could not, if you had a baby, could not give the baby two names. That was kind of proud and worldly. So what ended up, and you were expected to use biblical names too. And so if you have a big community, you get a lot of Josephs. And there's a lot of Yoders. So you start nicknaming them. It's One-Arm Joe, and it's Two-Arm Joe, and it's Cookie Joe, and it's Lazy Joe, and you know, because you have to know who they are, right? But that's just a nickname. So that you could do that, but you couldn't officially give your kid two names. So my mom, she was feeling just a little bit oppressed by the rules. And she really wanted to give me two names. So she gave me LeRoy with a capital R. There was no space, so it was okay. But it was pushing it a little bit there. So Lee for Levi, my father's father, and Roy for my youngest uncle, my mom's youngest brother. And then Rosanna got a capital A in there. And also, it was okay, but it was pushing it a little bit. She was like that. So that was the sort of thing the deacon had to keep, he might have to go talk to you about that. And say, no, you can't do that. Another example is in Buchanan County, there was a rule about what color you painted your house and your barn. And people knew that, red barn, white house. They didn't know why, but that was a rule. And maybe you bought a farm from an English neighbor, and the barn was white. Well, you had until you could go through one communion, you had 2 communions per year, but the second communion, it needed to be painted, or the deacon would come talk to you. And again, we're not quite sure what that was about. It was about uniformity a little bit, and not all bad, but maybe it was the idea that, if you had the colors right, you'd know not to act like an animal when you're in the house or something. I don't know. When you're young, you make up stories to explain things. And that's just the way it is, So go with it. There's one other example that I had firsthand. And this was after we moved away to New Glarus and we were back to visit Grandpa Levi and Grandma Lady Ann Hershberger. And we came in there and got out, and I could tell that Grandpa Levi was in a bad mood. He was just kind of, And pretty soon we found out what the deal was. He had just finished reupholstering his buggy seat. I was like, well, it looks pretty nice to me. Well, it turns out it was the second time in 2 weeks that he reupholstered it. The first time, Grandma was like, look, this is an outrage. There's some big cracks and the stuffing's coming out. We can't be seen in this buggy going to church. You've got to do something about that. All right. Grandpa was like, and he went out to figure out what to do, and he went upstairs in the loft of his little shop, and he found a roll of naga hide. And it was dark blue, kind of a Yale dark blue. Now, he didn't know that. But he was like, great, I don't have to spend any money. Because he was frugal. So and they moved in not that many years before from northern Indiana, right? And in northern Indiana, the Amish do stuff that just doesn't get done in Buchanan County. So he didn't have all the rules like imprinted in his head. And so he got that out, measured it, and did it all right, and brass tacks all the way around the edge, and made it just so. And Grandma was happy, and they came to church. But wouldn't you know, Ed Gingrich noticed as he drove out, it stood out like a sore thumb, dark blue among black. And Ed had to go later that week, speak to a man older than himself and talk about the slippery slope. And how, the next thing will have divorce and remarriage. And it just irked Grandpa Levi, but he knew in his heart that Deacon Ed was right. And he was upset, but he went out there and pulled all those brass tacks out, and he went to town and he bought a piece of black naga hide, and he cut it out and he put it all back on there. And he'd done what was right, but he was resentful and upset. So it was not easy being a deacon, is the point of the story. You had to hold the line and enforce the rules, and you had to do that if you were a good deacon with humility and with kindness. So, my mom wasn't thinking at all about me, out naked on the road and stuff where the English could see me. But she looked out her window and she saw Ed Gingrich's rig right in. Amish people, they recognize everybody's horse and everybody, you know who it is just like that. You recognize what's important. And she saw Ed climb out, and he had on his Sunday clothes, and it was Thursday. She knew something was up. You just kind of get tight, you know, in your throat a little bit and get a little sweaty when you see this happening. And she was going through her mind, what could it be? And she had like 2, 3, 4 possibilities. And he came into the house, and he was nervous. And he talked a little bit about the price of pigs and the weather. And then he's like, word has it that you let LeRoy go outside and play on the road without any clothes on, where the English could see him. And they both understood that there was a little scandal in that. You know, it was not decorous. You know? And my mom took a deep breath. So she give it a second. And then you know what she did? She threw me under the bus. She said, it is not my fault. He escaped. I had nothing to do with it. And she was convincing enough that she was not required to make a public confession the next Sunday at the end of the church service. It's hard to imagine this, but at that time, that kind of shame, you would almost rather die than have to do that in front of all your peers in that formal moment. It was frightening, and it really made you think twice before you went out and did something you thought might be wrong. He said, well, don't let it happen again. And she was so relieved. So, that's the story of how I got my start in mechanics. And it is also the very first time that I was in trouble with the church. And I was not even yet a year old. Important things we want to work into our habits. And we do that by having rituals. And we have rituals whether we know it or not. You know, what we do when we wake up, you know, do we take a drink, do we brush our teeth, the next thing that happens in our life. And when it's important and it matters and it helps build us in our identity with the church and with Christ, then we should give thought to that. And we want to make those rituals not only remind us of truth, but clothe them in beauty. So that somebody that's observing will be taken by the sort of solemnness and the beauty of what we do. So I encourage people, when you're doing communion, think of organizing it so that it is a beautiful and a reflective moment. What we do, we want to, our whole lives we want to do that with. That grace and that beauty will sometimes capture the ideals of somebody who's looking for organization and for meaning in their life. So don't underestimate beauty. I go to National Storytelling Convention. Used to go every year. It's down in Eastern Tennessee in Jonesboro. Don't so much anymore. I go to other little storytelling festivals. And I go to enjoy myself, but also to check out what the techniques are. It's like, you know, storytellers will watch what a speaker will do. And don't feel nervous if you're a minister, but I'm watching you. And I'm thinking about how you do that and how you show your teeth and the tone and the tempo and how that strikes a certain kind of certain kind of sort of emotional state. Because what we're doing when we're telling stories is we're not only appealing to the mind and to logic, we're appealing to emotions, because we know that the way to our desires is through our heart. What we want and what we love and what we feel strongly. So I go to these things and I look at techniques and I think, oh, that's really interesting. I'm going to try that. I have a friend, his stage name is Izzy Towinski. And he always starts out his little set with juggling. And he's just a little guy. And he's like, I am terribly nervous when I look out and all these eyes are looking at me. Because I feel like a rabbit with like cats staring at me. And I'm just like, they're all ready to leap on me and eat me. That's the feeling we get sometimes when we're standing and everybody's looking at us. We want attention, but we have this deep, wired sort of fear of lots of eyes staring at us. You know, a cat's eyes are on the front of their face so that they can triangulate and judge distance. And they can get close enough until they know they can, in one leap, hit you and get you and bite you, you know? Now animals that aren't into eating other animals, often you'll notice them, the ones that get eaten, their eyes are on the sides of their head. They cannot focus for distance, but they have almost a 360-degree vision, so they are on the lookout. And they're especially tuned into two eyes staring at them. So you'll notice that if you like have a dog over here, you look at it. It'll almost like it'll feel that. And it will be like, what's going on here? It's like deep in our lower brain. And it affects us too. It's part of how we survive saber-toothed tigers or whatever it is. You know? We don't see that as much. And for people who've never spoken in public, they get up and they don't expect that. And they have their notes ready and they have their really important points. And if it's your first time, and you've talked with 4 friends, you know, and that's okay. You don't get it there. But all of a sudden, you've got enough eyes, and it kicks in, and it can be absolutely devastating the first time. And so be really kind if, like, a young guy does their first devotional, and he gets, like, dry-mouthed, and you can see sweat rings, and it's kind of like shaking, and you know the butterflies are in there. This is a real thing, and it's hard, and it's scary, and there are people who leave their first effort and say, I would rather die than speak in public again. So, if you can get used to it, if you expect it, it's not as terrifying if somebody gives you some warnings, and you can get used to it, but you don't want to totally get used to it. You always want to be a little scared so that you pay attention and you do it well, and you don't go on too long. So Izzy, he always juggled at first. He'd just start juggling and he'd talk, you know, and then he'd say, look, what this does here is it calms my nerves down so that I can talk. And it works. It works. I've done this before I have to get on a set to talk, and it's almost hypnotic. I'm just looking at these things and calming down. And out of that, now I can go. In a far-off country, beside a little village, up the path on a hill, stood a castle. And in the castle, down the hall, through the kitchen, over by the cook stove, under the table, sat a young boy who would one day become the king. But all was not right with that boy. People say that what happened one day was the king put on a huge feast for all of his important noblemen and noblewomen. And they had beautiful food and rows and people eating and chandeliers. And when everybody had eaten well, the king got up and he made a speech. And the speech was full of power and glory. And everybody was, wow, we've got a wonderful king. And then the queen got up and she did a speech, and it had beauty and grace in it. And then she sat down. And then somebody said, the prince should have a speech. And somebody, he was 12 years old, somebody put him up on the table. He was shy. And he was supposed to make a speech. And when he looked out at all those eyes looking at him, he felt like that rabbit. And his throat went dry. And he started shaking. And all of a sudden he realized he could never be the king. He jumped off that table, out of that door, down the hall, into the kitchen. And as he was going, he ripped off his silk shirt. And he tore off his trousers, kicked off his shoes. And he sat under the table, over there by the cooking stove. He sat there and he gobbled like a turkey. Now, he didn't want to be a turkey. He didn't plan on it. Well, when he realized that he could not, he realized that turkeys did not have to rule the kingdom. And he knew he couldn't do it. He decided he was a turkey. And he sat there and he would not come out. And he refused to eat any food except for grains of wheat that the cooks would throw on the ground there under the table for him to peck at. Now, Mom and Dad, King and Queen, they were very concerned for their son. As, you mom and dads would be. They called in doctors. They called in sages. They called in, religious people, anybody they could think of that might have a cure for their turkey prince. And those people brought green ointments and foul-smelling potions and did incantations and all the things that they could think of, but nothing changed the life of that little lonely prince. Until one day, a stranger came walking up the path and knocked on the door of the castle and said, I want to see the king and the queen. And he was brought before them, and with a ridiculous bow, he stood there. He had a crazy old hat on and an old torn coat, but his face shone like a new star. And he said, I've heard the sad story of your son, and I'd like to try healing him. Well, the king looked at him and was like, we've tried everything. He didn't think he looked like he was good material. The queen was like, let him try. What could it hurt? And so he was taken down the hall, and for 2 days he stood in the corner by the door and observed the strange and lonely life of the prince under the table. And on the 3rd day, he got up, and he roared, and he howled, and he threw off his clothes. And he went over there, and he got down under the table, and he squatted by the turkey prince there. And the turkey prince looked up at him, and he said, for the first time in weeks, he said, just who do you think you are? And what right do you have to be here under the table with me? Well, the healer looked at him and said, I'm surprised you can't tell. I'm a turkey just like you. And the prince thought, wow, wonderful, he's a turkey like me. And they sat there and they visited, and they ate some of those grains of wheat and had a good time. Well, in the evening, when everybody went home and the fire went out, it started getting colder in there. And the healer said to the turkey prince, I'm cold. Watch this. And he got out from under the table and he went over and he wrapped a big warm cloak around him. And he came back and the turkey prince said, "Oh, you're a turkey and you're wearing people clothes." And the healer said, "I know who I am. I'm a turkey who's cold, and I can wear a cloak if I want to." That made sense. So the turkey prince got himself a cloak too, and they were both warm that night. Well, the next night, they were sitting there, and the healer said, "You know, I'm hungry, and they're not going to throw grain down until tomorrow morning. Watch this." He got out, he went over to the work table, and he opened the bread box, and he sliced off a nice big chunk of bread. And he went to the cooler, and he got cheese out and slabbed off a piece of yellow cheese, and he put it on there, and he took a nice big bite and chewed. The turkey prince was like, "You're eating people food." "I know who I am. I'm a turkey who's hungry for bread and cheese, and I can have it." Well, the turkey prince was quite relieved. He's like, "Oh, you wanted cheese and bread too." He got out and got himself a sandwich. Well, the days went by, and gradually, the prince was convinced that he could come out from under the table, and he started eating his food like normal children his age, at a table. And the healer took him outside the castle, and they walked down the path, and they looked at people's lives. They saw old people about to die. They saw babies just born, sick people, happy, sad. And gradually, things went better for the turkey prince. They took a trip. The healer and the turkey prince went through deserts, and he learned how to find water where it was dry. They went through jungles, and he learned how to find a smile on a sad child's face. They learned how to build bridges over rivers they couldn't swim over. And after quite a long time, they got back to the castle. And the healer presented the prince to his mom and dad and said, "My work here is over. Your son loves his life again." And the king and the queen gave that strange man a new cloak to wear, a bag of gold coins, and all of the gratefulness that a healed family could give. And with a ridiculous bow, he went off down the path. Well, years went by, and the king and the queen both became old and died. And the prince, the turkey prince, became the new king. And he loved his small country and the people in it, and he loved walking through it. And he would come to a village, and he would make a little speech, and people would gather to listen to him, and he'd listen to their problems and help solve them. Well, one day, he was doing just that, and he noticed in the front, he saw a man and a woman who looked distressed. He could just tell. And after he was done speaking, he went over to them and said, "Is there something I can do to help you?" Well, the father said, yeah, there is. We've got this son. But, there's just no help for him. And the mom said, "He thinks he's a turkey." The king said, "Take me to him at once." And down the alley, and around the corner at their little house, they came through the door, down the little hall, in the kitchen, by the sink, under the table, crouched a frightened young man. And to the surprise of everyone, the king threw off his gold crown stripped off his beautiful cloak and rushed over there and squatted right down there under the table with that little boy. And for the first time in months, the little boy opened his mouth and spoke, and he looked at the strange king and he said, "Just who do you think you are? And what right do you have to be down here under the table with me?" And the king looked at him with all the kindness of a healed person, and he said, "I'm surprised you can't tell. I'm a turkey, just like you." That story comes from Poland in the 1870s. It was told by a rabbi, and it was actually a rooster in his story. And it was to help a boy who was 13 years old and was overwhelmed by the responsibilities of adult life. But it's a much bigger story than just that little story. And we recognize that most of us have been teenagers. And the point here is, nobody can bring healing like someone who's been sick and been healed. We are essentially healers for the world and for our church and for our families. We're a lot of other things, but we are healers as well. And we don't just heal bodies, we heal souls. We bring the healing of Christ. When I was in the middle of second grade, our family moved from New Glarus, Wisconsin to Muscadet. It's on the Wisconsin River. And I really liked school in New Glarus. One of my favorite things was hot lunch. You'd bring 25 cents, and then you could have hot lunch, and the lunch ladies would clump things on your tray. And then the 25 cents included either chocolate milk or white milk in those little cartons, you know, where you have to like fold it back. And if you're really good, you can pull out and then you can just drink out of there like a cool kid. And I just love that. My favorite thing of all the lunch lady stuff was shoestring potatoes. It was like matchsticks, wooden matchsticks. And if you put 2 or 3 together, you could scoop up a giant load of ketchup. And oh my goodness, was that good. I loved shoestring potatoes. And that was great fun. But it came to an abrupt end when we moved to Muscadet. And in Muscadet, those Mennonites had a parochial school. It was called Muscadet Christian Day School. And, you know, it was scary. My sister was in kindergarten. I was in second grade. They didn't have a kindergarten, so she just had to go straight into first grade. And I remember the very first day we went to school there. It was maybe in, November. Dad dropped us off on his way to work. He'd gotten a job at Easy Trail Welding on wagons. And there was a school. It was just like this old one-room country school kind of thing with a little cloakroom on the front. And the first thing we saw, there was a pump, just like an iron pump. And if you were thirsty, you could raise your hand and you'd go out and pump and fill a cup and drink water there. And later when it was colder, the 8th grade boys told me to lick the pump handle. And I still remember pulling away and seeing like the skin of my tongue in a kind of triangular shape on there. And boy, I never did that again. So we went past that and we opened, and we were just like 30 seconds late, so everybody's already in their desk. And we looked around, and there's this row of hooks, and there was a name in front of it, on top of every hook. And then you could put your coat on the hook, and you put your boots underneath there. And we got our hooks with our names and boots there. And then right over here on this side was a wooden table, and next to it was an old rusty electric stove, and beside that was an old rusty electric refrigerator. And on the table, we just totally focused, there were lunch pails. And they weren't just ordinary like green or silver lunch pails. There was a Huey, Dewey, and Louie lunch pail, the ducks. And there was a Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs lunch pail. And we knew all these characters, but they were on lunch pails. Some amazing lucky kids had these lunch pails. And we were really interested in what might be inside those lunch pails. And at noon, my sister and I, we were watching everything that came down. And you know what they had in there? Everybody had Wonder Bread sandwiches with peanut butter and grape jelly. And they were cut on the diagonal. And you know what else they had in there? They had chips. And not just like a baggie with some chips in it. It was like a real little chip baggie that you would open, like poof. With pictures of chips on the outside. And they had those little Snickers bars, like 2 of them each. And the ones that had thermoses, they had chocolate milk in them. That was good. But most of them went out to the refrigerator and they had pop, like cans of Mountain Dew, or Pepsi, or Coca-Cola. And they would open those and it would like click, pop, and it would fizz up. And it was absolutely amazing. Is it me? Am I under one of those things? We'll keep trying here. So, we came home from that first day of school and we were full of important information for our mom. At this school, everybody has Wonder Bread on the diagonal. And chips, and Snicker bars, and pop. And, Mom listened to us. She gave us our, it's like figured out. And you know what she said? She didn't answer us directly. She just said, the whiter the bread, the sooner you're dead. She didn't get it. This was our life, our social life, on the balance. We could either be weird and completely miss out on everything, or we could have Snickers and chip bags. We went through the whole thing again, because she obviously didn't catch on. And then she said something about if everybody jumped off the cliff. She still wasn't, we weren't getting through to her. Let's just put it that way. We knew our stories were inadequate. Now you have to understand my mom a little bit so that you really understand how this all came about. When we moved from Buchanan County and my mom and dad got settled on their first own farm and they were making payments and it was so exciting and they were young and frisky. Well, they did a lot of things just because they were poor. They didn't have much money, so you had a garden. You didn't go to town and buy stuff because you had to save money so that you could make your payments so you could have some land. And you could milk cows, and that was the picture of success in their minds. Well, it turned out that the reason the farms were available is a lot of the people in that area, their children had gone off to the University of Madison, Wisconsin, and they got an education. And then they decided milking cows is really a drag. And they decided to get a job with insurance or with marketing or something like that, where it ended at 5 o'clock and they could go amuse themselves and have spending money. And they never came home. And these parents, they got old and they had to sell their farms and nobody wanted them. So the Amish came and bought them, but not just the Amish. There was an unusual other bunch of people, and we called them hippies. And they had been in the University of Madison, Wisconsin, but they got tired of it because they saw their friends graduate and they couldn't get a job teaching because you don't need that many teachers, apparently. And here they had all this education, and they were like, this isn't quite right. These people decided to come out and try to figure out how to farm again. And often they were the children of people who'd been city people already. And they'd say things like, we want to get out on the land and we want to get relevant. They liked that word, relevant. And we weren't sure what it was. So we call them hippies because they like beards. This is actually half Amish, half hippie, this beard, as I confess, the first step of the 12-step program. So what it ended up being is it was like Amish farm, hippie farm, hippie farm, Amish farm, hippie farm. And we just thought they were the most amazing creatures ever. In our buggies, we would so rubberneck because you're going slow and you get time to see everything. They had goats. And they had weeds everywhere, and they didn't know how to make fences, I mean, whoever heard of that? And their houses were strange. But my mom and dad, they were like, we got to, they're neighbors, so we got to go see them. So we'd go over there, and my mom would bring them something, and they'd invite us in, and they'd come over, and we'd be out in the garden doing whatever, and there'd be these tomatoes, and they'd be oohing and ahhing about our amazing garden. It was just an ordinary garden, what everybody raised. You weeded it, you watered it, and you had food to eat the whole year. And Mom would say, you can have some tomatoes if you want here. And you know what they did with them? They just ate them right there without salt and without slicing. Just bit them off like an apple. We'd never seen that. And I was just like, oh my word, these are the best tomatoes I've ever eaten in my life. And my mom and my dad, they got a little bit of the big head going on. It's like somebody really thinks we're something. And they'd come over and ask advice about goats. And they thought my dad was just brilliant because he knew which end of the horse the oats went in and how to get milk out of a cow. We were kind of amused, but we were also kind of like, we're the experts here. And we'd come over and they would be entertaining to us and we'd try to help a little bit. And we amused each other and entertained each other. They'd slow down and look, and when my mom started baking bread to earn a little extra money, they would come buy bread and they would tear chunks off of it and eat it, We were just amazed. No slicing and sitting and blessing and the butter and everything. Just rip it off and eat it. I've involved a little of that in my own eating since I'm a bachelor. I feel that you can kind of taste some of the food in your fingertips if you really think about it, and it adds to the experience. And I take some inspiration from dogs. You know how when a dog is eating meat, they enjoy that so much, but the favorite part is the bone. And they'll just work that bone and gnaw the ends and slurp the marrow. And I figured out that dogs are onto something. Bones really do taste good, and the marrow is wonderful. And so I don't quite do it like a dog does, but I enjoy all the parts now. And I like bones. So there's where it is. My mom, she got a recipe for granola from a hippie family. And she still makes that same granola. And it was kind of edgy and unusual. Everybody else ate cornflakes, and we had granola. And we grew up with that. And started raising our own wheat, a little bit out of the inspiration from the hippies. grinding it and making whole wheat flour and making bread out of it that way. We raised bees because somebody told us that honey has vitamin K in it. My father's a hemophiliac. And he did, we thought vitamin K helped that condition a little bit. So we kind of became crunchy in that way, kind of organic. Before that was remotely on people's radar. It wasn't cool at all, but we were the hippies and we did that. So when we moved up to Muscadet, my mom was not, she figured out what was good food and what wasn't. And she was not about to be brought back to eating Wonder Bread again. I don't care what the children said. So she realized that, we had some anxiety about the food, and she decided her way of doing this was she was going to make us really nice food. And you know what she did? She found this wicker basket. It was like this big, with 2 handles that folded up. And she found this checkered white and red little cloth, like a towel, put over the top. She thought it was just the cutest thing ever, right out of Red Riding Hood, And then she fixed us. She put a quart of homemade chili in there, in one of those glass jars with the ring and everything, and a stainless steel saucepan, and a pint jar with homemade pickles and dill, and a pint jar with homemade apple butter, and half a loaf of brown bread, and a big old bread knife to saw on that bread, and a couple of Tupperware, those old yellow Tupperware bowls, plastic, the ones that were rough, kind of on the inside. When you scrape with your spoon, it would like crash, crash. Like a whole bunch of children are doing that. It sounds, it's loud. You can really almost make an orchestra out of it. And that's what we had to carry to school and put beside Huey, Dewey, and Louie, and Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs. And 10 minutes before noon, my sister, her job was to go out, put the saucepan on the old burnt, the electric stove, and chug the chili in there. And then, when it was time to eat, everybody else sat in their desks and ate their cool lunches. We sat up front at the class table because it was level, and chili in a bowl on a slanting desk was not a good idea. And we were like Exhibit A for uncool. And the basket and all the gear and chugging the stuff in there and slabbing off and gritching. We tried not to gritch with our spoons, but it was just loud, and it was just like, oh. And I remember Donald, who was in my grade. I had two students there. Donald just couldn't be, he came out of his desk and he came over to have a taste. He said, what is that in that bowl? He said, it's chili. It's homemade chili. It's good. You have to be loyal to your family, even if you're embarrassed. And he went back to his, Wonder Bread sandwich. And Roxanne came over. And she wanted to know about the bread. That was the most amazing dark-looking bread she'd ever seen. It's homemade whole wheat bread. It's good. And we take a big bite to convince her and others. Ooh. And she went back to her food. It's a wonder we survived psychologically. But that is what our mom did to us in 2nd and 1st grade. She figured out that you could go down to Dean Spring, and there was watercress growing there, and she made us watercress sandwiches. And my dad was into making homemade cheese at the time, and every batch was different. And some of them were edible. So we get a slab of homemade cheese and a wad of watercress, and my mom was not, she didn't have time to do all the picking and stuff. There'd be a snail in there every time. And you'd be eating, and I confess, it wasn't bad, but it was weird. Watercress sandwiches. Why can't we be normal? Like peanut butter and grape jelly. But that was not our lot. And you crunch down on that snail, and we'd complain, and my mom said something about protein. She probably read about like speed runners and protein and stuff or something. We got nowhere with her at all. And that was our life. And somehow we survived, and we learned how to add and subtract and read and write, and we've been somewhat successful. My sisters all are school teachers, and I think now they're some of the very best school teachers I have ever known or seen. I'm very, very proud of them, and encourage would-be teachers to visit their classrooms and check it out and see how you light a fire, not just fill a bucket. Because that's what we want. We want to light fires. And then all we do is get out of the way and give a little bit of help, and the world is going to change. And the other weird thing, now that I'm all grown up, is I pay good money for artisan cheese now, because it tastes kind of like some of those batches my dad made way back then. And I absolutely adore watercress. Like, I'll go to great trouble. I know a few places in Kansas where I can get it. And I don't tell anybody. And I don't take pictures with data on it so they can't find it, you know. It's like hunting mushrooms or where the fish bite, you know, that kind of thing. So I go get that now. And homemade chili is just the cat's meow on a cold day. It's strange how we can be things that are weird and that maybe we think we don't like. You know, I say this often, I say, you cannot argue with taste. If you say you don't like it, I can argue all day, but you still don't like it. And it's not really going to reach you, but I can say, you can develop taste. And I might be able to show you how butter helps develop taste. Put butter on whatever you want to like. And it will gradually become something you truly do like. So what did my mom give us that we did not understand at that time at all? She taught us to be reflective and thoughtful about developing our desires. Don't ignore your peers, but don't feel that that's the only right way. Be thoughtful and be centered and do what is right and cultivate a desire for that. And I'm very grateful to my mom for being the person she was, even though it was not easy being a second grade son. It's time for lunch, but we have to, just one more little moral here, right? I want to talk a little bit about how to tell stories, but I think I'll do that more next time when I can give a little more space. I just want to tell you, here's one reason why you should be telling stories and what kind of stories you should be telling. People study this, people who are concerned about child development and child psychology, and they say children who know their family history have higher self-esteem and fewer emotional problems, such as depression. And it's not about happy stories. That doesn't do it. The stories that reach children are the stories about you when you were their age and you had difficulty. And somebody teased you, or you had this weird thing, or whatever it was. Just say it and explain. And you don't even have to be very specific. They say, you survived somehow. And it gives the child hope who might be bullied or might have a problem that makes them embarrassed, or they're just sort of like, you know, in a bad moment in their development and they're not getting the help they need from the teacher or from the students. Tell your children stories and don't whitewash them. They know when it's a real story. You know, that's enough, right there. That's a really good thought to go on. Let's, who's in charge? I'm done.
Well, I know I'm in charge. Thank you, LeRoy. It's good to have some insights from the past. Great. I guess you're free to go. Lunch is in half an hour. So when you hear the bell, head up to the dining hall and have some lunch.
I guess if there is a question, you're welcome to ask it right now. If not, no problem.
All right, go.
Yeah, so tonight is song starting.
How you draw that, what your children can be, that's not looking to make myself feel good. My children don't do this. Like it needs to be knowing what actually is happening to a child's heart. If we don't do that, or are we doing this too much? And beginning of the same race on that. Example for my dad. Growing up, he was very much into it. He was fine. He knew me and his brothers playing civil in school. But then desire to probably play sports at public school. So we're still in public school, and I couldn't do that. But Dad had come from public school, so he was a big fan. He played sports in public school. And then, so he kind of told us that he wanted to. So we did. And I said, wise. I yeah. So my children, I'm not sure how much they play volleyball or homeschool, and so they play volleyball now, which is fine. But, Emily, homeschool, some people teach them homeschool, they're pretty good at it. People play in high school. Well, families are like, you could, but it's not kind of for the same reasons. My dad told me kind of influences Jameson and kind of what he was fun with football. Same great about learning football. Yeah, it's too much effort, too much focus. Go, practice. What's the point? And then not and then this year, Gene had a we were talking about golf with high school. Well, I feel weird. Golf is, it's way smaller. It's much more less the people that play golf aren't you? Just kind of whatever.